Hello everyone, this is Paul the Oaken Knight coming to you with another one of my guilty pleasures. You see, when I stumbled across Compass's Stellar Horizons a year or so ago, an expansive, comprehensive game of solar system exploration designed by a real-life rocket scientist and based on real science, I was hooked. Yes, I am truly a child of the 60s. Its most unusual and compelling feature is the map design, which are beautifully rendered large cutouts of the individual planets, moons, and so forth of our solar system. That's it. There is nothing connecting the cutouts. You can set the game up on a fairly large tabletop, or for something closer to scale, the parking lot of your local Walmart. Is that cool or what? But then, it was revealed unto me, as Grandmaster Yoda once said, there is another. Holy crap, another? Yes, Brunhilde, enter High Frontier for All, the 4th edition of High Frontier, a game designed by Phil Eklund, rocket scientist, and published by Eon Games Design / Sierra Madre Games. HF4A, not to be confused with R2-D2, its scope is pretty much the same as Stellar Horizons, but uses very different mechanics and emphasizes different aspects of spaceflight. But let's first get the 1,000-pound elephant in the open, the map. What you see here is the neoprene version of the map, larger than the full-size hard-mounted map provided in the base game, and of course is available separately. Its sheer size provides the first lesson to be learned. Space is big. But also, the map effectively reveals that there are two types of gamers. When first viewing this map, Type 1 gamers will pronounce, "Oh my God, I could never figure this out. I would rather have my tongue superglued to dog poo for a year than learn this beast." While a Type 2 gamer would say, "Oh my God, is this cool? I want to retire immediately so I can devote my life to exploring the solar system. Good thing I am already retired." Now that I have your attention, let's bump back to a higher level. The game provides an interplanetary playground for 1 to 5 players and states that it is playable in 1 to 4 hours. While this time constraint may be achieved in smaller or limited scenarios, it is sheer fantasy for an all-up multiplayer campaign game. Situation normal. Even so, the campaign is not so long that some version of it could not be accomplished in an extended single session by experienced gamers. Those with analysis paralysis need not apply. Game formats. The base game box actually gives 3 different games to play, ranging from a basic family game up to the full so-called core game, along with its first expansion module. First, Space Diamonds. Space Diamonds is a family game with a completely separate set of easy rules. It does not use the core rules at all, and is its own thing with many of its own cards and counters. It amounts to a scavenger hunt, with players getting points for traversing the solar system. Since Space Diamonds has little in common with the core game, it has little to offer if your goal is to play the core. But this is where the For All subtitle comes into play. The game may be learned and enjoyed by just about anyone. Second, Race for Glory. Race for Glory is the intermediate version of the game. While it also has its own rulebook, it actually uses the core manual by highlighting the differences between the 2 levels of play. As such, it is a valuable stepping stone towards learning the core rules. I started here, and yes, it definitely smoothed the learning curve. Third, High Frontier, the core game. The core game is the real deal. When players refer to playing the core system, this is what they are talking about. Even so, the length of the core game is based on the number of 12-year solar cycles to be played, each turn being 1 year. Short games are 4 solar cycles in length, medium 5, and the long game is 7 cycles. I can also see players agreeing to play until we run out of time, making play suitable for multiplayer 1-day sessions. In addition, the game can be expanded to include any of 4 modules, ranging from Module 0 through Module 3. Mod 0 is included with the base game and introduces politics via a Senate to pass various laws that change gameplay. Others introduce space stations, freighters, higher technology, and even combat. While the pure core game is all about exploring, claiming territory, and industrializing claims, the expansions broaden the base strategies, providing even more strategies that may be followed. Space is very big. Gameplay. Players are initially ordered according to which faction they control. Each player heads a single faction, such as NASA, the European Space Agency, or even SpaceX. Yes, you get to be Elon Musk. Each faction has a single advantage that provides a benefit or allows them to break a rule in a certain way. For example, the European Space Agency is assumed to have pusher satellites that provide extra thrust to solar-powered rockets, while the Chinese may commit felonies at will, such as claim jumping, thereby converting other factions' claims to their own. Each player begins with their faction selections, some game markers, and 6 Aqua. Aqua has 3 uses. First, when in low Earth orbit, or LEO, it is money. Money is used to buy rocket components in open auctions. Note the potential Solitaire impact here, but I will have more to say on this later. Second, when in a rocket and part of its propulsion system, it is rocket fuel. Fuel is used to perform rocket burns that consume varying amounts of fuel depending on the rocket's mass and the efficiency of its propulsion system. Third, when anywhere else, it is stored fuel, including as rocket cargo, such as with a tanker. Player turns consist of 1 full action, 1 rocket action, and any number of free actions. For the first several turns, players use their full action to initiate an auction. The player initiating an auction is the auctioneer and begins by selecting the top card on one of 6 stacks in the core game. For example, rockets need some way to move, so a card may be drawn from the thruster stack. Players bid using their supply of Aqua, with the auctioneer choosing a winner, generally themselves, in the event of a tie. In core gameplay, the auction winner also receives the top card on each deck that the auction card depends on to be functional. For example, a given thruster may depend on a generator. Therefore, the player winning the thruster auction also receives a generator card from the top of the generator deck at no additional cost. When the auctioneer wins an auction, his Aqua goes to the bank. When a non-auctioneer wins, he pays the auctioneer. Patents and rocket parts. Cards move from the auction block to a player's hand. Players with 4 or more cards in their hands may not initiate nor bid in auctions. While in a player's hand, cards represent mere patents, the right to build a component, not the component itself. Players convert patents into actual physical components by performing the full action boost. Players pay the boost cost for as many components as they wish and can afford, based on the mass of all the components boosted. This is a full action. Back to the map. The seeming rat's nets of lines flowing across this most excellent map represent paths for rockets to follow based on delta V rather than distance traveled. Delta V, oh man, here we go with the space talk. Rockets originate from components in low Earth orbit, or LEO. Here, the faction owner combines components into a functioning missile plus a functioning payload intended to complete a mission of the player's choice. Rockets travel through the various map nodes by performing burns to attain the required delta V to maintain on path, using Lagrange points to change trajectory, Homan intersections to further adjust course, and more. Details such as radiation belts and flyby slingshot effects are also represented. In short, players get a sense of using real orbital mechanics to move from point A to point B. You quickly learn in a playable format that there is no straight line in space, and second that, yes, space is hard. Let's trace a path from Earth to Mars. All right, so Before we head off to Mars, let me start by taking a look in more detail at our playmat. Each player gets one of these, and this is as it would appear at the start of the game. The top part here records the thrust that your rocket puts out, the net thrust. We'll get to that in a minute, but counters, one of these rocket counters goes on that chart. This graph-looking thing here is actually tracking mass and rocket fuel, and we'll talk about that in a minute. This is explaining how propulsion works. This is the thrust and the maximum number of burns per turn you can do. This says that it takes 1 unit of fuel per burn. The star thing in the middle says something in there is solar powered, and the farther away you get from the sun, the weaker it will get. Think of the heliocentric zones that are on the map, all those big circle things with groups of planets and asteroids in them. Each one is rated for solar strength. So the Earth zone, the Terran zone, is neutral. It's a 0. The Mars zone, the next far out, is -1, and so forth. And so anything with this would get a -1 if it begins its move in the Martian zone. So the 5 would become a 4. These are the markers that come with the game. The way that these work, the wet marker and the dry marker, and there's a little bit more to it than that, but this is the basics. If you're going to launch a rocket, you take a look at the cards that's going to constitute the rocket. You sum up the masses of all the cards, and that becomes the dry mass of the rocket. So let's assume the total card weight was a mass of 4. So we would put the dry counter in 4. And then we would have to calculate the number of burns that would be required to get to the destination, also factoring in whether it's a one-way or two-way trip. If it's crewed, it's probably two-way. If it is robotic, it's probably one-way. So we take the number of burns we take multiplied by the efficiency of the rocket, in which case this particular rocket's a 1. And that will tell us how much fuel we will consume to do the required number of burns to get to where we want to go. So in this case, let's say we require 3 burns, and we know our efficiency is 1, so therefore it's going to use 3 increments of fuel. So we will require 1 aqua to fuel this. We will convert the aqua into fuel, and it would go here. Now, why do we only need 1 aqua to fuel a rocket that's going to do 3 burns? It is because this is not the amount of aqua needed, but it's the number of burn points you need, which are these white ones, okay? And if you see in between the wet and dry marker, there's a 3. That's telling you when you put aqua here, it's going to give you 3 points of burns, and this particular rocket only uses 1 point per burn. So you go first burn, second burn, third burn. When wet and dry meet, that means there's no wet mass in the rocket anymore. The fuel is expended. Okay, the rocket can still coast, but it can't do any more burns. Just because I am what I am, I hate these markers. These tiny little, they're like the size of a decent grain of rice. I don't like those at all. I substitute these. So, for example, I use the orange one for the dry mass, and there are 3 different types of rocket fuel in the game. Most common, especially in the beginning, is water. So I use the blue one for water, and that's the wet mass. And that's how I keep my sanity instead of using these little rice grain things. Would have been nice if the playmats were mounted. They are not. They're just kind of cardstock, decent cardstock, but cardstock nonetheless. And I think to get everything to fit, what they did is these are not normal size cards, okay? They are chimera size. So I was able to track down some sleeves. There's this and one other, and they're not, Mayday sleeves are okay-ish. They're better than inner sleeves for heft, but they're certainly not as nice as many others that are out there for outer sleeves. All I can say is, well, they do work, and you do see they sort of fit, but they do have a little extra on top. I still like to sleeve them, especially in a game that I like, that I'm probably going to be playing some of. It's what you need to do to make this work. Down here we have 2 outposts. Those are basically counter substitutions. If you have a planet, say, or even in space, you can go ahead and place equipment. And if that equipment is, say, not part of a rocket, it has to go somewhere. The outpost counter goes to to where the equipment is being left. It's a simple matter of substituting whatever is your pre-positioning with a marker. And the marker represents what's at the location involved. Let's see. You start with 6 Aqua when you begin the game. The core game without modules, 6 is the number. And your crew. Now, the crew is interesting. There's some extra rules attached to the crew. One of which is that you can't purposefully kill them. You can't kill them, you can't have them commit suicide. For example, it's pretty easy to land on Mars, but it's hard to take off from Mars. And if you put your crew on Mars, this thing would become part of a rocket. You would take it to Mars, it would land, and they would be there. You can't kill it, you can't decommission it like you can equipment, but you may not be able to get it off Mars, in which case it just stays there. One country, like I mentioned, the Chinese, they can commit felonies, and killing crew is a felony, but they can do it and you can't. The Japanese, which is this particular crew, has a different special ability. Remember I told you that you can't initiate or participate in an auction if you have 4 or more cards in your hand. Well, these guys can. They don't care about that restriction. They have some kind of workaround that they use. Now, let's assume that this is your starting position in the game. Say during the course of play, you've initiated auctions. You have bid against others in auctions that others have initiated. And through the course of play, you've accumulated this deck of cards. All right, and we will walk through these here in a second. Now, you have probably accumulated additional cards. So, remember, the cards in your hand represent patents. Patents are not physical objects. They are the right to construct a physical object, but they are not the physical object themselves, as long as they are in your hand. You're restricted to having no more than 4, or you can't participate in an auction, and you can't bid in an auction. But let's say during the course of play you did this, and most likely you've been paying money. 0 is a valid bid, but I don't think your opponents are going to let you pick up a bunch of cards paying 0. So you're going to have to pay some Aqua to get these things. And during the course of play, you will need to raise money. You will need to raise additional Aqua. One way is to use a full action, and you get 1 Aqua. Another way is to lose an auction that you are the auctioneer for, that was your proposed auction, to an opponent. And so the Aqua that your opponent pays goes to you instead of to the bank. You, as the auctioneer, if you're proposing an auction, if you win it, you probably will win it. The Aqua goes to the bank. Okay? And the third way, and the very common way, is to sell cards from your hand. So if you had one of these cards, you didn't actually need it. As a full action, you could sell it. It would go into the bottom of the deck from which it came from, and you would get 3 Aqua for doing that. So that way, that would be how you raise Aqua so that you can accumulate these things. All right, so let's assume you've had that. This is in your hand, okay? And if you look real close, squint real close, there's little arrows here, and it says your hand goes here. All right, so how do we get those from being patents to physical objects? And the answer is they have to be boosted to low Earth orbit, or LEO. So you're going to move them from this stack to this stack. It takes a full action to do it. You can boost any and all cards that are in your hand. However, you have to pay in Aqua the cost, the total mass. So boosting this card would take 1 Aqua. Boosting this one, this is a heavy one. This would take 4. There's several zeros out there. Here's one of them. 2 more, 2 more. So this would take 4. This would take 9 Aqua. Very, very expensive. Okay? Like I said, I got 6, but let's assume we can do it. Let's assume we've accumulated a whole bunch of Aqua by selling off cards we didn't need and getting this stack from the hand to low Earth orbit. Okay, so that's the first step to getting to something out into space. Once it's in low Earth orbit, you would do a cargo move, which is basically a free stack-to-stack move. Remember, you only get 1 full action, as I call them at least, per turn, but you get any number of free actions, as long as you don't do it in the middle of a full action. You can't interrupt it and then go and resume your full action, or interrupt and resume a rocket move, which is the third thing you can do. All right, so this thing is a free action. All these cards, once they're in Leo, they can be moved to rocket. Now in this game, you only get one rocket in space at any one time. So you only have one place to put them, in the core version of the game at least. So what do you have to do to launch this rocket? And this would be a rocket move, okay? And there would be some more cargo movement, which is also free actions. So we'll talk about that in a second. Let's assume you're going to Mars, and I can tell you from experience, Mars is 3 burns away. All right, so we have to bring enough fuel to do 3 burns. First step, how heavy is this rocket? It's 1, 5, 7, 9. So this goes on 9. That would be my dry mass marker, the way I play the game, okay? We know that our rocket is very efficient. It only takes 1 impulse of fuel. It's like the previous example. In addition, though, you can see that this thruster depends on something, and that something is a generator. This can be either of the 2 types of generator, so it's good for that. Very flexible. It's also good because it doesn't have any further dependencies like some cards will have. So this symbol fulfills the need for that. So when these 2 are mated together, you now have a functioning rocket. All right. But we do have this triangle is a thrust symbol. Okay, it's telling you what the rocket does. And the wrench says this modifies your main thruster. What it does in this case, it doesn't modify the numbers directly, but it says there is some solar-powered element in it. So your heliocentric zone is going to change the thrust. We're at Earth. We're starting at Earth, which is 0. It's neutral, so it's not going to change anything. That's our rocket. Now, the second thing you need is a mission payload. And we're going to say, all right, we want to put claim markers down on Mars. To put claim markers down, you need to have a robonaut. Note that you could use your crew because they also have this capability. Mars has ample resources, so it doesn't matter how good it is. That's what the number is. Little is good. That's as bad as you get, and that's decent for a basic card. Okay, it's good enough. This dune buggy thing is exactly what it looks like. It is a rover, and if you put a claim down on one of the 3 sites of Mars, you can grab all of them if they're available. So this would actually give all of Mars, not just one part of Mars. With this card, it's good, but it has things it depends on. That X is a type of reactor. It's the most rare type. I just picked this one out as an example. This can be either an X type or a bomb type, which is much more common. It has 2 mass, radiation hardness of 3, but most importantly, it has no further dependencies, because this fun of satisfying dependencies can go on. The robonaut also requires cooling. It has 1 thermometer here. We have to take a radiator with at least 1 cooling. It has further mass. It also has a radiation hardness rating we'll talk about in a bit. But with these 3 cards, we have a functioning robonaut. With these 2 cards, we have a functioning rocket. We put them together. We do the stack-to-stack move, a cargo move, made the rocket. We know our dry mass is 9. We know we need to do 3 burns. We know that the efficiency of the rocket is 1. Very efficient rocket. Okay? So that means we need 3 impulses of fuel. So we have to load up fuel into the rocket. These numbers, these small numbers here, tell us how many fuel impulses we get when we put an Aqua in this 10 marker. So we get 2. We know our efficiency is 1 point, and we know we need to do 3 burns, so we know we need to have 3 impulses of rocket. 3 times 1 is 3. All right, so that tells us we need to put in 2 Aquas. So we go up 2, we have 4 impulses of burn. Okay, again, this is an extremely efficient rocket. It takes 1 point per burn. There's others that take much more than that. So the bad news is that this rocket is heavy. The good news is that this rocket is efficient. And the main thing that makes it heavy is this generator that has a mass of 4. That's pretty chunky. So we could actually do 4 burns, but we're only going to need 3. And then we have to figure out what is the net thrust. Well, the gross thrust is 3. That's just the rocket. We could lose or gain from the solar powered aspect of this. We're at Leo at Earth. That's neutral. That's going to be 0. The sun doesn't do anything, but the mass of the rocket does. And if you look, there's color bands here. And if you look up here, it says this is a transport rocket, -1 net thrust. So the gross thrust is the rocket, which is a 3. We lose 1 net thrust because of the overall size of the rocket. That means we only get 2 burns per turn. And when we're dealing with radiation checks, speed matters. How fast you get through the radiation matters. This is a fairly slow rocket. It could have trouble. We're going to pretend that doesn't exist, but I will mention it. And this goes on the map. And it's placed on Leo, just right by the Earth, low Earth orbit. Okay, that is where these cards are. This rocket is still physically in the same general area as our card stack here that are staged in Leo. The rocket is in Leo, but it's going to be moving now. Now remember, rocket movement is the third thing you can do during your turn. You get 1 rocket movement, but it doesn't mean you can only move 1 space or something. It means you have 1 activation of the rocket. You're limited by the number of burns you can do. Alrighty, so what's the first stop? Well, we have to do a burn. And if you look at this kind of pinkish circle, that is a Lagrange point, and it's pink. That says we got to do a burn. So what does the burn cost for this particular rocket? 1 point. So we do that, and then we move the rocket. Second thing we have to do is we get to move farther down this line leading us to Mars, and it does not require a burn, because most actually don't require burns. You can do a lot of coasting in space. Basically saying you don't have to have the rocket continuously working to get where you want to go. You may have to have it. The way this game models space is that it's delta V. It is speed-based, not distance-based. So you may need to attain a certain speed to stay on a certain trajectory. That may require you to do a burn to speed up or slow down. But the burn does not require to actually move you along. It's required to keep you on your path. All right. So the second circle we enter is going to be a radiation check. So you're going to roll a die. You're going to subtract your net thrust, and then any component that has a radiation resistance level less than that fries. So, for example, if we're going 2 and we roll a 4, that means any component that is less than a 2 fries. All right. And we would not, in that case, we wouldn't have any. But say if we rolled a 6 and we subtract 2, it's a 4. Well, the Robonaut would fry. The reactor would fry. The radiator would fry. In other words, the mission would be probably scrubbed in space. Maybe you could decommission everything where you're there, and decommissioning means that you take the cards and you put them back in your hand again. They're no longer physical objects. They are simply patents once again. You could put an outpost there out in the space with the things that didn't fry, staging it for a follow-on mission to be picked up. That's possible. Or you could decommission everything and start over. It's up to you. But let's assume we didn't fry anything, so this mission is still underway. The next step is geosynchronous orbit, and it requires a burn. So, burn baby burn. And we advance to the next Lagrange point. After passing through geosynchronous orbit and performing the required burn to get there, we pass to the L2 Lagrange point. Each planet, my understanding, I'm not a rocket scientist, has 5 of them. So this is the Lagrange 2 for Earth and Sun. It is a place where gravity equals out, so you can effectively park there and have the gravitational pull of the Earth and the Sun equal out with each other. The other thing that does is it is a place where in game turns you can change direction to any direction you want to go at that intersection for free, except that you can't go back the way you came. Okay. Let's see. The next thing is proceed from L2, because it is not a required burn site, to what is called a Homan Intersection. Okay. And a Homan intersections let you go pass straight through them at no cost. Or if you have to change direction or choose to change direction, you have to do two burns. Two burns, not one. Or you can just stop there, and then the next turn you can pick up and go the direction you want to go, any direction you want to go, including the direction you came from, without any burn cost. So it's a freebie if you pause there. And so that is what we are going to do. So the rocket is going to proceed to this Homan intersection, and that he would stop moving there. In his next turn, he would continue on. And our rocket proceeds to the Sol-Mars Lagrange Point. This is just coasting. This does not require a burn. However, the next zone he needs to go to does require a burn, so he will perform his third burn prior to entering the next area. And we have one fuel point left. Remember I said it would take 3, and so it shall. And from this burn point, we are now in low Mars orbit, or Elmo, instead of Leo. And we can hang out there, but what we're really going to do is to land on Mars. And there's 2 ways to do it. One is with a lander. That requires overcoming the gravitational well of Mars. Mars is rated 10 points of gravity. That's what the 10 is in these 3 sites that comprise Mars. So to do that, we would need to have 11 thrust. Well, we don't have 11 thrust. But if you look over on the side a little bit, you see a parachute. The parachute says you can parachute down. You don't have to rocket yourself down. And so our rocket will proceed to the parachute. It's considered hazardous. You roll a die. 1 chance in 6 of this whole mission blowing up, unless you make failure as not an option. If you use failure as not an option, you have to pay 4 Aqua from your store back home. And that means that you did the necessary investments to get through this, and you don't have to roll the die. Note that you got to pay before you roll. You don't get to roll and then save yourself. All right, so let's assume we've passed through the parachute, and our rocket is now on Mars. All right, it's on Mars. What does that mean? Well, we've already done a rocket move. Let's say we've already done our one main action. Let's assume we have. Or maybe we haven't. Yeah, we paused a turn, so it took 2 turns to get here. So let's say we haven't done that. Great. But we've also done a rocket move. And so we can do a prospect action that will go ahead and have our robonaut go out and lay claim to the planet. How this works is that each of these sites, as they're called, these hexagonal sites that are on the map representing asteroids and planets and such, has a rating based on the number of water droplets. There's the number, like the 10, that's the gravity strength. That's not what we're dealing with here. But if you look down, there's also a certain number of water droplets there. And that represents how rich a resource planet it is. In order to place a claim, your robonaut's rating has to be equal to or less than the number of water droplets. Mars has 3s and 4s. So R2 is good as gold. It can lay claim anywhere. And because it is a rover, and the sites of Mars, the 3 sites per hour, are connected by what's called a buggy road. All of them are connected. This card can lay claim to all of Mars. All 3 parts of Mars can be claimed with a single action. And so, of course, that was the whole purpose for the Japanese to be going to Mars. So that is how we might do a mission. Missions are decided on by the players, what they want to do based on the cards they have, based on what other players have done, what's still available, what isn't available, as far as something might be claimed by somebody else, or it might be busted. Okay? There's the second step of laying a claim, assuming that you are eligible based on the water droplets and how good your robonaut is to roll for success. To be successful with a claim, after you determine that you're eligible based on the water droplets and the how good your robonaut is, you have to roll a die, and that's going to be compared to the number that the site has. So since Mars are tens, and the die roll is based on an unmodified six-sided die, anything equal to or less than the numeric rating of the site is successful. So basically, you can't fail a roll on Mars. There's too much there to find. It's not like a little asteroid that you may or may not find something. All right. So in this case, our Japanese player has successfully landed on Mars. They have successfully prospected all three sites of Mars and can lay their claim to all three sites all in one claim action. Now, claiming does not make anything go away. So in theory, you could leave the hit list on Mars. More likely, you're going to decommission this stuff. That means stick it back in your hand. So effectively, the equipment is abandoned on Mars. Or possibly you'll leave your Robonaut and the things that it depends on there, in which case you would add an outpost to one of the sites of Mars where your rocket landed. And these guys would be pre-positioned for when you do the next step, which would be to get a refinery on Mars. Once you have a refinery and a robonaut on Mars, or anywhere, you can go to the next step and industrialize, okay? And then the next step after that is to put a colony there. For that, you need to have crew there. And so that is basically how things develop in the core game. You go from nothing to a claim, to an industrialized claim, to a colonized and industrialized claim. And once you industrialize, you're no longer subject to claim jumping. Others can still use your factory if you're not there to stop them. That would also be a felony if you don't agree to it. You can agree to it, but if you don't agree to it, then that would be a felony, which means the Chinese can just do it anyway even if you don't like it. Final step is to have a colony there, and that would stop anybody from using it when you don't want them to. Okay, many other benefits for an industrialized site, but suffice to say, in the core game, that is how you're going to win, is to have more and better developed industrial sites. And if you want to colonize them, so much the better. All right, so at this point, I'd like to go ahead and conclude with an evaluation of High Frontier for All. I'm going to pull in some comparisons with Stellar Horizons just to give you a look at one versus the other. One of the issues with High Frontier for All is how suitable is it for solitaire play. Now, there are a couple solitaire-specific scenarios. I'm not talking about those. I'm sure those are fine for solitaire play, but I'm talking about how playable is the game's core for playing solitaire, because that's the scenario that I'm going to be interested in. I want to play the campaign. Well, I have gone through the campaign a couple times. I have played it three-sided and found that, well, it actually works better than I expected. So let's go ahead and dig into that just a touch. The first problem with Solitaire, with High Frontier for All, is the auction concept for getting patents into players' hands. I think it works. It is somewhat challenging for some people. They might not like it, but I found it to work okay. I think there's some factors that mitigate and make it work okay, even in solitaire play. First, the auctioneering faction chooses the component that's going to be the subject of the auction. So presumably he needs that component, but others may not need that component. The question is not what the component is worth, but what it is worth to you or to each individual faction. The auctioneer has chosen a component that has a high relative value for them. It may not be very important at all to other factions, so just naturally they would not compete for the auction. Now, the mechanics of the auction also help. Zero is a valid auction bid, and the bidding is open outcry. Any player can bid anything at any time. It's not going around in a circle. So immediately the auctioneer is just going to say, I bid zero. They're nuts if they don't bid zero for their first auction, because there may not be any other bids. So why bid something and pay for it when you could have got it for zero? So the first bid's automatic. You don't have to think about it. Competing factions may not be able to bid because First, they may not have any Aqua to bid with. Maybe the auctioneer has a lot of, maybe the auctioneer has considerably more Aqua available to bid with, and the others simply don't want to compete with that. Or their hands may already have the 4 cards that prevents them from initiating or bidding in auctions. In a simple case, you have a 2-player game. One player has 4 cards in their hand. The other player is guaranteed to be able to win an auction at 0 because the other guy can't bid. All this works to mitigate the issues involving having auctions in play. I found it to work okay. It's still a very, very interesting and cool game, even with the auctions in solitaire mode. And the second issue that affects solitaire play, I think to a lesser degree, are the rules covering interplayer negotiation. This is a smaller part of the game. I suppose in some face-to-face games, multiplayer games, it may be a bigger thing, but I don't think this substantially interferes with the quality of the gameplay. I've even had some factions agreed on negotiated actions that I thought made sense. So, for example, if a component in an auction is needed by the auctioneer, but maybe one of the secondary ones, one of the freebie throw-ins that are depended on, maybe it's the wrong one. Maybe they don't need it, but some other faction does. So it's pretty easy to say that, okay, the other faction can agree not to bid if the auctioneer will accept, say, 1 Aqua for the component he really doesn't need. That would allow him to get the component he does need on the cheap. So instead of having things auctioned up and having Aqua go into the bank, he's +1 for the component he doesn't need. He sells it to the other guy, and he gets the component he does need for 0. So that would be a win-win for both sides, and I did some of that. That's okay. As far as other aspects of the game, the components are generally good, but with some room for improvement. For gameplay, I'd say for solitaire rating, base diamond's probably about a 3. It's a basic game. It's not a big deal. It's something that you could teach your kids and have turn it into a family game if you so chose. Race for Glory, I'd put it at the midpoint of intermediate, about a 5. The core game, I don't think it is an advanced, complicated game. Just the core game by itself, I'd put it as a 6 on the GMT 9-point scale. That's an advanced intermediate. But maybe with all of the modules, maybe it gets up to about a 7. But this is not a game that's going to make your brain melt. Getting the right components into the rocket might, but just playing the mechanics that they are provided by the game should not make your brain melt. Solitaire, we've already covered that. I'd put it at about a 6. It is certainly not designed for solitaire. There are a couple solitaire scenarios, who cares? The core game, I'd put it at about a 6. Playable, still fun to play. The general mechanics of the game, some players may find that the whole process of getting the correct cards to link together with their dependencies into a rocket is a bit fiddly. We didn't really get into it too much, but how much fuel does the thing take to do each burn? And then that might limit you as far as how far out you go. You've got to put fuel in that rocket. Fuel costs Aqua. But all that being said, when you finally do get your rocket put together and you do have a mission that you're trying to accomplish, it's really cool. It's fun to have your rocket blast off, go through this intricate process of tracing down the lines on the map, getting to the Lagrange points, and all of that is a lot of fun. I do enjoy that quite a bit. To compare Stellar Horizons and High Frontier, these are 2 games that are trying to do the same thing. The subject matter is the same. The approach is very different. Both are sophisticated games in their own right, but they take a different view of things. I've already mentioned the map. Stellar Horizons has got planets floating out in space. High Frontier has this much more complicated map that's just amazing just to look at. For technology, High Frontier uses the patents. And I didn't mention, but patents can come and go. There are events that can happen that make patents go away. An event can happen and all players under certain circumstances can be affected. Stellar Horizons uses conventional technology tree, and once you get to a certain node on the tree, that technology is yours for the rest of the game, and in fact helps you build other technologies that link to it. So Stellar Horizons' treatment of technology is much more conventional versus the patent treatment in High Frontier. Rocket flight in High Frontier, I've already said, is much more detailed, and maybe some folks would think it's more than they want to deal with. Stellar Horizons, more abstract. You're going from point A to point B. It does have a concept of speed, and so if you have higher technology, you can get from point A to point B faster. But basically, there's a certain number of turns that your spacecraft is going to use to go from A to B, whereupon it has other options. If it's a flyby satellite, it takes its pictures and keeps on going to the next planet. Or is it an orbiter, or is it a lander? Three basic types. With High Frontier, it's really depending on the components you put in there. And one of the big components that we haven't talked too much about is the crew. So the only difference between a manned and unmanned mission in High Frontier is whether the crew card is included. Personally, I find the orbital mechanics part of Stellar Horizon really fascinating. I enjoy it. I like noodling around with this, seeing what's the best path to take from A to B, and kind of being surprised when I discover new ways to get there that may not have occurred to me. As far as support for the game, High Frontier, I think the rules are written reasonably. I found them, in most cases, not hard to understand. There were parts in the book that didn't make sense to me, but I found that going onto YouTube, there is some excellent support out there. There's one video that's like 12 hours long. It's like three guys. One guy, God's expert in the game, spends 2 hours explaining the core plus all the modules, and then they actually play to conclusion a three-player game. There's also a French guy out there, and he has a heavy French accent, or using his words, a delicious French accent. His explanation of the rules of the game are great. Any problems I had understanding the rule book, I went straight there, and the fog was lifted. He gives a very clear explanations of how to play this game. I think the support for High Frontier in the YouTube community from the publisher is a bit better. Certainly from the community, I'd say, than the Stellar Horizons community. So accordingly, I think that in Stellar Horizons, you may need to house rule some things to get through some of the inconsistencies in the book. But I'd say once you do that, you're going to be left with a great game to play. Overall, Stellar Horizons provides a more abstract view of exploring the solar system. A little less fussy. You don't have this whole mechanic of trying to get these cards to chain together properly. While High Frontier is just very, very crunchy. For me, the bottom line is that I like them both. I would happily play either one. So I'm not going to express a preference because I think they're both great games. All right, that's what I got for High Frontier for all. If you guys give me enough thumbs up and likes and things of that nature, I may do some playthrough on this one just because I like it so much. But I'm going to let you guys guide me. If you are not interested that much in this game, then I will just move on to something new. Let me know. If you are currently a subscriber, I say thank you oh so very much for supporting me and what I'm doing here. If you are not, please consider hitting the subscribe button. But for now, this is Paul, the Oak Knight, simply wishing you all a pleasant evening. Bye for now.